The time is at hand.
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order.
One of the many spirits said to haunt the area.
Unknown animal attack.
We need a great reset.
Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen.
Welcome to In Dark Places. My name is Junebug Fugit. Are you Salazar? And if so, have you seen Nibiru? Word has it that Planet X and Nibiru are at it again with their shenanigans. But I tell you what, there's something crazy going on with the weather. All these sunspots and the northern lights are dipping way down into the United States. Never really done that before. And they can't holler climate change on all this crap either, because temperatures are going up all across our solar system. Did you know that? Temperature of the moon is raising, and Mars and Jupiter and pretty much all the planets, like their temperatures are raising, and scientists don't know why. But my guess is it's not climate change, not global warming or anything like that, because there ain't nobody there driving cars and stuff to be polluting the atmosphere. So wonder what the powers that be have to say about that, with their weird rants about climate change and Mother Earth and everything like that. I guess they better send some electric cars up to Mars, because they're going to need them. Temperatures raising on Mars too, and the people on Mars are eating too many cows and stuff like that. So climate change. And here's what's going on in the news this week. This is a story sent in by our friend Paul Chadwick. Thanks, Paul. Strange objects on the ocean floor may be UFO crash debris, says Harvard professor, by Chris Eberhardt. Thanks, Chris. Microscopic remnants of what could be an extraterrestrial object that crashed into the Pacific Ocean nearly a decade ago were recovered by a team of scientists. In total, 50 microscopic spherules that look like specks of dust and weigh a collective 35 milligrams were collected during a historic expedition off the coast of Papua New Guinea, said Harvard professor Avi Loeb, who discovered a runaway fireball in 2014 that exploded in Earth's lower atmosphere before falling into the water. The object, labeled IM-1, is actually tougher and has material strength that is higher than all the specks of rock that were cut along by NASA. Loeb told Fox News Digital in an exclusive video interview from the expedition boat. That makes it quite unusual, given IM-1's high speed and anomalous material strength. Its source must have been a natural environment different from the solar system, or an extraterrestrial technological civilization. But the collected materials are so small they can only be seen through a microscope, he said. That's how the team learned they were spherical and perfectly round. My daughter asked me if she could put one on her necklace, but I told her it's too small to thread, said Loeb with a smile. But when studied through a microscope, the objects appear to look like a molten raindrop. He compared them to blood droplets, and he said, will hopefully lead back to where the object originated. This could be the first time humans put their hands on interstellar material, Loeb said. This has never been done before. We never received a package at our doorstep from a cosmic neighbor. They were collected off the ocean floor with essentially a giant magnet, and Loeb said the objects only appeared along the trajectory of the fireball's path. The expedition will come to a close by the end of last week, because this is kind of older. And The team will analyze the collected material's elemental and isotopic composition, and then report the data in a paper submitted to a peer-reviewed journal, Loeb wrote in his most recent Medium essay. The interpretation will be left to follow-up papers, he said in the latest of his 33 essays. In response to the naysayers, we say nothing other than show our data in our first publication. One cannot argue the facts, only with interpretations. But no matter what the conclusion is, the trip was historic and successful, Loeb said. The object was originally classified as a meteor, but the object's speed and trajectory were outliners that suggested it originated outside the solar system, said Loeb. It's been a while since we checked in on our friends in Florida. I always get crazy news stories out of Florida for some reason. So, it's high time we take a look at Florida. Florida man contracts flesh-eating infection from bite from relative. By Patrick Riley. Thanks, Patrick. A Florida man nearly lost his leg when he contracted a nasty flesh-eating bacterial infection after being bitten by a family member during a fight. Donnie Adams of Tampa Bay developed a small, painful bump after a relative sunk her teeth into his right thigh as he attempted to break up a tussle at a family gathering in February. Assuming it was just a harmless lesion, he took himself to get a tinnitus shot and a course of antibiotics, the Tampa Bay Times reported. However, 3 days later, Adams could barely walk. The 52-year-old returned to Florida Northside Hospital in St. Petersburg and was immediately rushed into emergency surgery. I would have never imagined that a human bite would turn into something so horrific as a flesh-eating bacteria, Adams told WFLA when wound care specialist Fritz Brink made his first incision. A gray ooze leaked from Adams' leg. Each additional cut revealed bright red, rotting flesh from his knee to his groin, Brink told the Tampa Bay Times. About 70% of the tissue in Adams' thigh had to be removed. He then required follow-up surgery to remove the remaining infected flesh. The flesh-eating bacteria, known as necrotizing fasciitis, kills tissue surrounding muscles and nerves. While common among swimmers in tropical climates, doctors had never seen a case in which they were sure came from another human's mouth. Brink told the Tampa Bay Times that while it's a unique transmission of a deadly germ, human mouths are a perfect climate for bacteria to thrive. A human bite is dirtier than a dog bite as far as the kinds of bacteria that grow, the wound care specialist said. Normal bacteria in an abnormal spot can be a real problem. If Adams had put off going back to the hospital for another day, Brink said the infection likely would have spread to his abdomen, putting him in danger of septic shock, which can be deadly. After spending 3 weeks recovering from surgery at the hospital, Adams had to undergo 6 months of additional treatment for the serious wound, according to the Tampa Bay Times. Even still, Brink told the paper Adams' positive attitude and strict adherence to a diet plan halved his anticipated recovery time. He learned how to treat the wounds himself, and Brink continued to treat Adams even after his insurance stopped covering treatment. Adams, who works at a funeral home, attributes his healing to prayer and meditation. He has since buried the hatchet with his relatives. The parties involved are very sorrowful, he said. Still, Adams' leg is heavily scarred and he suffers occasional pain, but he is grateful for the doctors that saved his leg. Just goes to show you, anything goes in Florida. And now, the Nicolas Cage Meltdown of the Week.
Stay clear! The Dutchman wants to enjoy his numbers racket, huh?
lot of people been wondering about my buddy Jimmy Haunted. Where is Jimmy? And I didn't really want to feel like I was spreading gossip about him on the internet and everything. But here's the deal. Jimmy had cataract surgery a couple months ago and has developed a rare condition as a result of the surgery called cystoid macular edema. It's an eye condition that affects part of your retina, and the macula becomes swollen and tiny blisters of fluid form that look like small cysts. And Jimmy's having a hard time right now. He can't really see too good. Cystoid macular edema can be treated effectively if diagnosed early. Recovery is a slow and gradual process and may take months. And everybody loves Jimmy. Let's all send our prayers out for a quick recovery. Last week on the show, I had a little paranormal cookout type of thing where I just dove into a bunch of stories, and this week is going to be kind of similar because I don't really have another topic this week either. Jimmy's good at picking topics. So this week on the show, we're going to be having a little paranormal campfire, telling some spooky stories by the campfire. You're camping out, it's summertime, you're out in the middle of nowhere, you need some scary stories. Someone to get the campfire started. And we're going to have some spooky campfire stories this week. The story is from a book called Monsters and Ghosts of West Virginia, written by Aaron Turner and Isaac McKinnon. It's a fun little book, so check it out if you see it out anywhere. I got mine at Books A Million. The Catfish Monster. Sam had had a rough week. A lot had happened, but he couldn't bear to think about any of it. Right now he was headed to the river to go fishing, and that was all he was going to think about. He stepped carefully through the brush to get down to the riverbank where he had left his boat. He flipped the boat over, cleared out the dirt and leaves, and pushed it into the water. After loading his fishing gear in the boat, Sam stepped in, sat down, and pushed away from the shore. He steadied the boat and paddled to his favorite spot right under the bridge in the shade. Not only was it comfortable, but the fish liked to feed there. Sam casually cast his line just a few yards from the boat and let the bait sink. He placed his pole in a holder and kicked back. He loved fishing, but right now he didn't care if he caught anything or not. It was so relaxing and quiet here, he had needed it. Suddenly there was a tug on his line, and Sam jumped up to grab the pole. This had to be a big fish. It took a lot of his effort to reel it in. It was putting up a fight, and Sam was thinking it was a carp or a catfish, or maybe even a large bass. As it got closer, Sam could just start making out a fish on the end of the line. Then a huge dark shape came up from beneath him. It grabbed the fish at the end of his line and dove back down. The line sang out in high-pitched whine as it was ripped through Sam's reel. Without thinking, Sam tightened his grip on his pole. Before he knew it, he was yanked overboard, smacking into the water. He ended up almost on top of the biggest creature you can imagine. He watched, dumbstruck, as fully 30 feet of giant catfish slid by underneath him. Then his stomach sank and his blood ran cold with terror as the beast turned toward him. It had bulging red eyes that fixed on him. Sam dropped his pole and swam for his life, just managing to clamber onto the boat before the fish got to him. He thought he was safe in the boat, but to his surprise, the fish turned and came back at him full speed. The monster fish rammed the boat with such force that Sam was tossed in the air and went flying. Maybe the only thing that saved him was the fact that he landed close enough to the shore that he was able to get out of the water before the fish could turn around. Sam stood up and looked back out over the water. He caught just one more glimpse of the huge fish before it disappeared into the murky depths. This is a story by our friend Nick Redfern. Thanks, Nick. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is a highly secure military installation that has a reputation for allegedly being the home of a number of well-preserved and some not so well-preserved corpses of dead aliens, presumably recovered from more than a few UFO crashes. Many UFO skeptics ignore or write off such claims. Harry Palmer knows better. It was a winter's night in 1988 when Palmer was ordered to report to one particular building on the base that he had never previously been in, one which was connected to a certain weaponous storage area. On doing so, he was met by 3 very pale men dressed in dark suits. They directed him to a door which, when opened, revealed a large elevator on the other side. Silently, the black-clad trio motioned him into the elevator. He quickly realized he was descending, and to a fairly deep degree. He was then ushered into a corridor which had a large vault-like door at its end. One of the 3 men opened it, and in a strange, high-pitched voice, ordered him into the vault. The same man pointed at a large container, perhaps 9 feet in length and 5 feet in width, and ordered Palmer to take a look inside. He did as he was told, and was shocked, to the point of feeling nauseous and clammy by the sight of a badly damaged body of what he, Palmer, could only guess was an extraterrestrial. The head was large, the eyes were huge and black, and the severed torso was skinny. In seconds, Palmer was forcibly taken out of the room, then taken into yet another room, and then ordered to sign a document that effectively said that if he ever spoke to anyone of what he saw, he would be prosecuted to the extent of the law for violating U.S. national security. After signing the document, a deeply worried Palmer was taken back up the elevator and unceremoniously left there to make his way back to his normal place of work. Clearly, this affair makes no sense at all, unless someone was playing a weird mind game with Palmer, although for what bizarre reason, one can scarcely guess. After all, why even show him the body in the first place? His work at the base had 0 to do with UFOs. The whole thing seemed like some bizarre theatrical event, but for whatever purpose was anyone's guess. There was a curious afterword to this particular story. The very day after Palmer contacted Nick Redfern, he received 4 hang-up phone calls in the early hours of the morning. It was something that led him to regret sharing his experience with him, as he admitted, when he called him back the following night. This was typically associated with the Men in Black in relation to UFO incidents. This one is an oldie. It's before In Dark Places' time, but it was covered on Haunted Chronicles. Slender Man stabbing. Morgan Geyser sentenced to 40 years in mental hospital. Geyser and Anissa Weir were 12 when they stabbed their best friend to appease fictional character. A 15-year-old girl has been sentenced to 40 years in a mental institution after admitting her part in an attempted murder carried out to win favor with a fictional character known as the Slender Man. Morgan Geyser and her friend Anissa Weir were both aged 12 when they lured their 12-year-old classmate to a park in Waukesha, Wisconsin, where Geyser stabbed her 19 times while Weir urged her on, the BBC says. Thanks, BBC. The pair left the victim for dead, but she was able to crawl out from where she was attacked and was found by a passing cyclist. One of the girls told police at the time that if they had not carried out the attack, her family would have been killed by Slender Man, an imaginary monster first created on a comedy internet forum and often portrayed as a tall, thin figure with a blank face and tentacles protruding from his back. Geyser pleaded guilty to the stabbing in October and has been undergoing psychiatric treatment while waiting to be sentenced, and is making progress with her mental illness to various degrees, The Guardian reports. And this was back in 2018, so probably would have been October 2018, I guess. Judge Michael Boren handed Geyser the maximum sentence, sought by prosecutors arguing that the crime was premeditated and Geyser remained a danger to herself and to others. "We cannot forget what we are dealing with," Boren said. "And we cannot forget that this was an attempted murder." Geyser broke down in court when she was given an opportunity to apologize to the victim and her family. "I never meant this to happen, and I hope that she's doing well," she said. The other teen involved in the stabbing, Vanessa Weir, was sentenced to 25 years in a mental institution in December of 2018. A woman gets 21 years for trying to kill her doppelganger with poisoned cheesecake. By Rachel Treisman. Thanks, Rachel. A Russian woman living in New York City was sentenced to 21 years in jail for poisoning her similar-looking friend with sedative-laced cheesecake, then stealing her identification and other valuables. A jury convicted Victoria Nasirova, 47, of attempted murder, assault, and other charges in February. Queens District Attorney Melinda Katz announced her sentence this week, nearly 7 years after the made-for-TV incident. "A ruthless and calculating con artist is going to prison for a long time for trying to murder her way to personal profit and gain," Katz said in a statement. "Thankfully, the victim survived the attack on her life, and we were able to deliver justice to her." The New York Post reports that the judge delivering Nasirova's sentence called her an extremely dangerous woman with a diabolical scheme, and that she cursed at him as she left the courtroom. Nasirova's lawyer, Jose Neves, told NPR in an email that he has filed an appeal against the verdict and sentencing, which will focus on legal procedural errors and evidentiary issue that occurred during her trial. The defense believes that Judge Holder's sentence was excessive and inappropriate, given Ms. Nasirova's life circumstances, her mental illness history, family support, and her traumatic experiences while living in the United States, he said. Nasirova is a Russian national and will likely be deported after her release from prison, Neves added. Prosecutors argued that Nasirova had poisoned her friend in order to steal her identity so that she wouldn't have to return to Russia, where she is wanted for a 2014 murder. Here's a recent report sent in to the BFRO. Thanks to those guys for all the work they do. We haven't heard from our friend Bigfoot in a while, so I figured I would just read this report from Potter County, Pennsylvania, that occurred on December 27th, 2022. The sighting occurred at my family hunting trip in Austin, Pennsylvania, while participating in the late muzzleloading deer season. We were doing an evening hunt that began at 2 p.m. While I was at my tree stand near a small clearing, my father and grandfather were pushing from the north and west. The hunt was quiet and uneventful up until legal shooting hours ended around 5:15. By this time, I had broke my stand and was walking back to the truck where we would all meet up. The small hike takes no more than 20 minutes. As I began to walk back, the sun had set and the night was setting in, so it was dark by the time I hit the road that led to the truck. And this is when I began to hear a knocking sound that appeared like it was coming from the direction where the clearing of my stand was. I paused for a second, initially disregarding the noise, and continued walking. Then, only after my next 2 steps, I heard the knocking again from the same direction. So I stopped walking and listened for a few minutes to hear more knocking, but from a different direction, and considerably further away. At this point, I began to feel uneasy, so I picked up the pace, and when I met my father and my grandfather at the truck, I asked them if they heard any knocking noises while in the woods, and both of them confirmed they did, in fact, hear the noises. We drove around for a little bit to see if we could find something that might explain the noises, but both that drive and the rest of the week we were hunting remained uneventful.
Quick! Name a difficult cleaning job where you'd use Top Job.
This greasy wall.
Good choice. But greasy dirt gets all over. How about floors?
My no-wax floors?
Yep, and cabinets, and
countertops and appliances?
Right again.
That's practically all over.
Sure. In fact, on the toughest baked-on greasy dirt, like on this range hood, Top Job by the bucket cleans better than the leading pines in ammonia.
But if Top Job cleans so many things so well...
Yes?
Why not call it Top Jobs?
When disaster struck the Radbod coal mine in Germany in 1908, the odds were stacked against mine worker Jan Gortal surviving. Yet he did. Frank Smith tells the tale. Thanks, Frank. On November 11, 1908, a triple explosion followed by a series of smaller blasts shook the Radbod mine in the Ruhr Valley, Germany. Working alone in the lowest seam, 3,171 feet below ground, was a 40-year-old Polish mineganger, Jan Gortal. 2 hours previously, he had sent the rest of his 20-man shift by way of the cage in the main shaft to a higher gallery 327 feet above to clear a routine rockfall. When Gortal heard the first muffled rumble, he was standing by the lift gates at the foot of the shaft, waiting for the cage to come down and carry him up to join his men. Gortal was an experienced miner who had worked in the gold fields of South Africa, as well as in coal mines in South America, Poland, France, and Germany. He knew instantly what had caused the ominous thunder, and to avoid the blast he knew was inevitable, he crouched by the gallery wall, bracing himself against the imminent shock waves. The first giant gust of burning air threw his head back against the rock, splitting open his scalp and shattering his miner's lamp. As was revealed at the inquiry held at Essen a month later, the boom heard by Gortal had been the sound of the first massive explosion that had swept along the layered galleries of the 80-year-old mine, burning 100 men to death in the first few minutes. Another 90 died when poisonous gases rolled along the darkened passageways, asphyxiating miners whose nostrils were already choked with dust. And the tragedy did not stop there, as rescuers were lowered down the main shaft on the day after the explosions. Pit props in the undamaged galleries splintered and broke, bringing down tons of rock and killing most of the remaining workers beneath them. Only 2 coal-bound tubes of life remained, one containing most of Gortal's shift, who may, the inquiry decided, have inadvertently struck the fatal spark and started the explosions, and the other holding Gortal himself, alone in the pitch dark. Later investigation showed that both tunnels had been completely sealed, the top one 2,844 feet from the surface by cave-ins at both ends, which had left a short stretch of tunnel undamaged but had entombed Gortal's workers, and the other 327 feet below, in which the ganger lay near the piles of rubble that had blocked the main lift shaft, the only exit in Gortal's tunnel. On the morning of the 4th day, dust and spray started erupting from a hole that appeared in the ground above the mine. When rescuers investigated, they found water, apparently coming from a reservoir deep under the ground, that had evidently been forced up at high pressure from the level of the topmost seam. When the water had subsided, they clambered down the hole it had made and found themselves in the topmost gallery, still sealed at both ends, save for the opening through which the water had gushed to flood the seam. All around floated the dead bodies of the 20 men who had been on Gortal's crew. In all, 360 miners had now died in the disaster. 3 more days passed while conditions were made safe for further investigation. Then, a week after the first explosion, the rescue team found Jan Gortal lying on a ledge with 2 broken legs and a torn scalp, but completely dry and 327 feet up from where he should have been. Geologists told the inquiry the shaft where he had been found was completely sealed off from the shaft where he had been left by his men before the explosion occurred. The only communication between them was by means of the lift shaft, and this had been partially blocked by rubble. The water had not penetrated this lower level, so suggestions that Gortal had been carried up by air and water pressure through the mining boreholes were dismissed as hydraulically impossible. Besides, the force required to lift his body over 300 feet was calculated to be far more than would be needed to smash him to a pulp. Many dead men, said a scientist, were flattened and crushed by the water alone. When in the autumn of 1908 the main shaft of the pit was dug out, evidence was found to vindicate the geologists' theories. The lower shaft in which Gortal had originally been trapped was bone dry and still sealed by fallen rock and coal dust. No other possible exit hole was discovered. Somehow, in a matter that defies science, the injured miner had been bodily transported through the stagnant water in which his dead comrades lay, to safety on a dry shelf in the top gallery. Furthermore, he had existed for 7 days, despite his weakened condition, without food or drinkable water. Gortal never went down the pit again. Instead, he and his 18-year-old wife, Lisa, went to work as farmers on the Alsace border. A staunch Roman Catholic, Gortal told the inquiry that prayer had sustained him. He reported how, after the first blast blew him over, he lost consciousness for a time, and then came to in the darkness. When he explored his surroundings, he found still water with an unbroken miner's lamp floating in it. He had managed to strike a light from pieces of dry stone and had lit the paraffin-soaked wick. Then he had thought of Lisa and prayed until the rescuers arrived. In answer to official demands for further explanations, Gortal's only often repeated reply was, "It must have been God." And that's about all the spooky campfire stories. Hope you enjoyed them. Creepy stuff. We'll see you again right here next week. God bless you guys.